Yeah, like I said, we've been in a drought since the early 2000s.
It's kind of
It's great.
scary. It's kind of scary. Meanwhile,
Yeah,
we get
well,
6 months a year of rain and power cities with it.
I mean, it could be a lot worse.
I mean, this is audio tapes and visual drugs. How you doing today, Ryan?
Doing pretty well. Still a little under the weather.
Well, as long as the weather's getting better. I'm Blind, and this is Audio Tapes and Visual Drugs, a show where we talk about media, alcohol, and whatever else we're nerding out about recently. So let's just hop right into it. What are you drinking tonight, if anything?
I have a company you're familiar with, Deschutes. I'm drinking their fresh squeezed IPA.
Thing's so expensive up here, it's not even funny.
It's so good.
It's so good. It's one of my top 5 IPAs in my opinion. Right up there with Fat Tug, which is my favorite IPA.
It's just like the grapefruit flavor is so
Although
nice.
I don't know if I'd want to drink it right now. I would think that, at least for me personally, that's very much a summer beer. Like, that's my middle of summer. Yeah, I'm going to splurge and buy a thing of Deschutes because it's so goddamn good. It's
Well, here's the thing.
Hmm?
You're in Vancouver. I'm in Phoenix. It's summer all year here.
That is true. Valid point. I mean, that it's like Deschutes and Ballast Point are my summer beers. Like, I will splurge once or twice and buy those beers, or wait until I go down to California for an event or something and drink it down there, because Ballast Point's Sculpin is another one of my favorite summer beers.
Sculpin's pretty popular around here too.
Yeah. Now I'm drinking something completely different. I've never actually heard of this brewery before, so I figured I'd give them a shot. They had an IPA, which I was planning to do last week, but drank it because I just wanted a beer. So I drank it before. They've apparently been around for a while, because apparently this won first place in British Columbia's beer awards in 2016. So this has been around for a minute. I've never seen it before, though. So this is called Barkerville Brewing. I've actually been to Barkerville before. It's a tiny little town up in the middle of goddamn nowhere in northern British Columbia. It's an old mining town. It's like how do I explain it? A kind of like it's a full town that's been restored into a museum. And they have like actors and people in the town. It's an old mining town, and you can like just walk around, and there's people just like doing the roles of gold rush miners, and it's really interesting just watching it and existing in there. It's like live action theater almost. And
that sounds exactly like Williams.
Yeah, kind of, probably. And then I'm drinking a 52-foot stout with birch syrup, oak barrels. They have a great logo. They've got this mustache with like a golden tooth underneath it, and I had to try it because I like stouts and it looked good. It is syrupy. It is thick. It is heavy. It's 7% alcohol. Not particularly high IBU, which I kind of like in a stout. It's very much kind of, the molasses aftertaste of a.
I'm just more into bitter beers. So IBUs are pretty good for me.
Like when you on the aftertaste, it has like kind of that molasses like backwards, but it also does have a little bit of a bitter in a way that I kind of like.
Interesting.
It's good. It's tasty. I would actually drink this again. I've never had this one before, and I if I find it again, I will definitely grab it, because it was not super expensive either.
See, this is why I wish I had the money to travel the world, just so I can
different beer,
drink different microbreweries and stuff like that. Be really nice.
Or just be somewhere where they go out of their way to get different beer from everywhere. It's one of the reasons why I love living in Vancouver, because British Columbia and Western Canada in general is like we joke that we shouldn't build a oil pipeline, we should build a beer pipeline because we produce so much beer.
I
And
agree.
yeah, I second this as well. But seriously, the amount of breweries in British Columbia alone is absurd. There's 150 breweries in the Lower Mainland. That's basically there's 150 breweries within a 45-minute bus ride of me, which is bonkers. And that's just the Lower Mainland area. When you factor in the rest of BC, it gets a little bit insane. Yeah, there's just so much variety and so many different things to try and taste. I feel like I should be going to the gym more if I'm being honest.
Yeah, well, speaking of a bit of variety, we got that in the this week's bands.
I think the whole like theme going in today was genre Whiplash.
Yep.
But we're going to be starting off with a little bit of Captain Jazz. And for those of you listening at home, I'm going to give you a little taste of what they sound like in the background of the following statements. But go tell us a little bit about Captain Jazz and why you picked them.
So, in general, I picked Captain Jazz, but it's mostly the Kinsella family that make this band pretty great. Captain Jazz is a sort of borderline post-punk, almost like a post-punk revival type of deal. They just ride this fine line of being the forefathers of Midwest emo with kind of the twinkling guitars that are apparent in their song, and being post-punk where it has heavy punk influences but is a lot more technical, so to speak.
Having never actually listened to them before this show, you've kind of exposed me to a lot of punk, which I think is, or emo and punk emo and Midwestern emo. It's kind of a genre I jumped over just completely because I think that I just kind of went directly from like classic rock to metal. So I just kind of skipped emo in a way. Like I listened to bands like Sum 41. I listened to bands like Blink 182. Excuse me as I vomit on the floor. And I listened to, bands like Green Day, right? But I never really journeyed out from there into the more specific genres, which is kind of a pity because growing up I was a fan of bands like, Sex Pistols, for example. I really liked bands like the Ramones. I listened to a lot of punk, like, Buzzcocks, like legit punk. And I never really made it to emo, and now I'm kind of wishing I did because I think I would have really liked it back then.
Well, I mean, it's never too late to get into it. There's still a lot of good revival bands out there that are, as the name would suggest, trying to revive the older style of the genre while still pushing it forward. But Captain Jazz is just one of those bands that you can tell just in the recording that they like to get up and just have a ton of fun. And that becomes extremely apparent in their cover of Take On Me, which, as a Take On Me cover, isn't the best, but you love it because, like, you can tell that they were just having fun.
It's just kind of silly more than anything.
Kind of the main point of some of their songs where it's almost like scatting, but they're not just like doing random stuff. It's them like actually saying the words. I think it's when like sounds and words are repeated. So like in one of the songs, he's like repeating. I would have to look up the lyrics to see what he's actually saying, but it sounds like he's like just saying like kitty kitty cat, and that's kind of like stuck with Captain Jazz throughout the songs that they ended up recording.
Burritos, Inspiration Point, Fork Balloon, Sports, Cards and Spokes, Automatic, Biographies, Kites, Kung Fu, Trophies, Banana Peels we've slipped on, and Eggshells we've tippy-toed over.
Yep.
That is the name of their only studio album.
They also have
I've been staring at that for the last 5 minutes while you've been talking, and I've been looking at that and going, I need to read that out at some point. So
then they put out their anthology, which is pretty much their entire discography, called An Alphabet of Polythology.
An alphabet of polythology? Is that actually a word, or is that just a thing they made up?
I'm not sure. knowing the band, they probably made it up. But one of the interesting things is, so they're considered like one of the driving forces behind the Midwestern emo genre, but they sound nothing like your standard Midwest emo bands, which use a lot of which heavily utilize like clean guitars, and the vocals are a little bit more dreamy at times, or even just downright raspy. So what ended up happening is, after being a band for about 6 years, they went and, or Mike Kinsella went and formed American Football, which is the quintessential Midwest emo band, which he also had his cousin, I believe, in the band instead of his brother Tim.
Nate, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, his same last name.
But they put out their first EP in '98. They put out their first full-length album in 1999, and they didn't do anything until 2016. And all their albums are named the same, including one that they will be releasing in March, is also called American Football. So
I'm upset by that. I don't know why, but there's like a lack of giving a shit in that.
Honestly, I think that's why. I think that's why I like it, because I think they really carried over the I don't really give a shit about, like, I love the music that I'm creating, but I don't really give a shit if other people do kind of thing. So I'm just not going to, so the album, I'm just going to keep everything the same.
Yeah.
So basically, to sum it up, Mike Kinsella is huge into music, but he's a bit out there because he literally has like 10 bands.
Yeah. No, I'm looking at him on Wikipedia right now, and it's like Captain Jazz, American Football, Joan of Arc, Owls, Owen, Nim Persons, I don't actually know how to say that, Kyle Fisher, The Songs of Alton. It's like he's got band ADD.
He definitely does. The main ones that he's a part of are Joan of Arc, There.
A lot of these don't even have Wikipedia pages.
Yeah. Captain Jazz, obviously. And Owls, which Owls was a very short-lived, kind of weird, emo, kind of indie band that we saw Tim come back to work with Mike. And it's weird because the bands don't sound similar at all. He's not just going, all right, I'm done with this band, I'm going to go make another band, and it's the same thing. It's definitely like him going, all right, well, I'm getting kind of bored playing, the same style, so I'm going to move on and change it up.
It's like they're just obsessed with music and want to use music as a medium to create art, but at the same time don't want to create the same type of art. So instead of giving their fans culture shock constantly by changing what they're doing, they're simply naming it a new thing, changing the pen name. I mean, authors do this all the time. Authors with multiple pen names, and they'll write one book and then they'll write another book under another pen name with a different publisher, and they'll continue on. And I think that this is something that's very much common in other artistic mediums, just not so much in the music world. And it's kind of interesting to see this. Like, this has been kind of a trip that I've fallen down in the last week. As I said, I hadn't heard of any of these bands really until a couple of weeks ago when you started suggesting them for this show. And I think that's kind of the point of this show, right? Is just discovering music and getting to listen to stuff we haven't heard before, and talking about things and discovering new art and new media. And honestly, this is, for me personally, this specific episode, the only portion that I listened to was Captain Jazz. And, I've listened to a little bit of American football now, and I need to go and kind of journey down the rabbit hole, as they like to say, and listen to some of these more obscure trips.
Journey down the Kinsella rabbit hole of 30 bands.
It's like 30 Rock, but bands.
Yeah, and I mean, so the reason why I chose Captain Jazz is they are one of the bands that were extremely prevalent in my formative years for music, when I was first discovering bands on my own.
Yeah.
And that really drove my musical interests, because if you look up a lot of the bands that he's been a part of, kind of have math rock influences. And I'm a really big fan of math rock. I'm a big fan of the two math genres of rock and mathcore. So like these bands really cemented my love for technical bands, whether they're technical in a heavy manner or technical in a kind of bubbly bubble pop kind of way, where it's just really nice clean guitars and sweet picking and stuff like that.
So I think that's a pretty good way to wrap up the first pick of this episode. But one final thought that I would like to put forward is just how did you first discover this band? I'm just curious.
So I discovered them in I think I was like in junior high. I think it was like 7th grade. I found a band called Rites of Spring, and that kind of like, Rites of Spring, for those who don't know, is they're kind of like the grandfathers of emo, that kind of embraced the emotive hardcore label that a lot of magazines and labels were putting on to the hardcore scene. Whereas on the opposite end, you had Ian MacKaye, who fucking hated it and would literally like blast reporters who were saying like, check out this new emotive hardcore band, Minor Threat. But anyways, I found them, and I was listening to them, and one of my friends walks over and he's like, hey, I see, or he was like, hey, what are you listening to? And I was like, I'm listening to Rites of Spring. And he puts on the earbuds, because it was an iPod Classic.
I had one of those. Then a big magnet got stuck to the back of it because people that I knew growing up were assholes, and it never worked again.
And he liked it. And so kind of as a way of like repaying the like paying it forward, he showed me Captain Jazz, and he explained that this is kind of like the evolution of what Rites of Spring was doing, because Rites of Spring, they're definitely hardcore, They get kind of technical, but not like super. Not to the point where you could call them post punk. Like bands like Joy Division and Susie and the Banshees and stuff. But so that's how I got into them. Eventually went over to his house and downloaded the album off his iTunes, and the rest is history.
So now we're here to talk about a little bit more of a recent, like shorter band's history. So we're going to be talking about a band that I've been listening to, for a couple of years now, actually. Maybe about a year and a half, give or take. We're going to be talking about a band called Wormwitch. Now, Wormwitch is what I would describe as a relatively light black metal band. It's like they're black metal, but at the same time they're very easy to get into.
Definitely.
I discovered them the first live. Actually, I was they only have one album, and it's called Strike Mortal Soil, and they kind of stole a show for me. So I went to a set of 3 shows back in 2016, I think, which was either right before or shortly after they released Strike Mortal Soil, which was their first album. And I remember when I was there, the first band played garbage. It was like a festival type deal where there was a bunch of indie bands every day, and I don't remember most of them, but first band played, they were awful. Second band played, they were slightly above awful. You know kind of what I mean? Like the band's trying to be deathcore and they really don't do a good job of it. It was just filling up that awful level of bad music. And we were just kind of sitting there at the back with beers. And these guys come up and they're like, "Hi, we're Wormwitch. You probably haven't heard of us, and that's fine, but we're from here, so we've probably moshed with you before. Yeah, just I don't know, hope you like the music." And they proceed to put on this. They played most of their first album, which is Strike Mortal Soil, and they fucking blew that crowd into pieces because the crowd was kind of bored. I'm not even like gonna dance around it. They were kind of bored. There wasn't a lot going on. It was a relatively uninteresting set so far, and holy crap! Because it was it's the venue that it was at does these little festival things once a year or twice a year or so, and they're essentially just like they always have a big headliner, so there's always a crowd there, but you also have to sit through like eight or so bands before you get to the band that you're there for. And these guys stole the show. It was awesome. They were loud, they were technical, they were skilled, they were good show. They put on a good show. They the singer crowd surfed at one point, and it was just a fantastic show. And I bought a patch, and I went home and I sat down and I bought the album on Bandcamp. And I've been listening to them on and off ever since. And I ended up seeing them a second time. I was over on Vancouver Island last February. Yes, last February. So about a year ago. And me and a friend of mine, we were there, and we were like, crap, if we stay here one more day, we can go to this show. So we stayed one more day, and we went to the show. And it was really loud. The venue was terrible. It's a venue called the Moxie, which is a old airplane hangar from World War II. And it was really loud, and Wormwitch was great. They put on a fantastic show. And I would describe them as a very much a easy entry to black metal, especially because they're relatively easy to understand, and they're not as what I would describe as hard to listen to as other black metal bands. But they also have the theatrics of black metal, which I absolutely love. And I'm just curious to hear what your thoughts are.
So my thoughts are it's a weird kind of mashup of black metal and sort of like a extreme metal kind of thing. The vocals are consistently black metal, but oftentimes like they'll break into like a pretty sweet like guitar riff or like a really nice solo, and it's just like, this is black metal, but this is also kind of like, like almost party music if you're into, blasting that kind of music at your parties, and people will still have fun with it.
It's certainly a very easy level of metal to get into. I think that there's certain types of metal that I think are more of what I would describe as an acquired taste, and black metal is absolutely that. But I think that they do a very good job kind of striking the balance between making it sound musical, and I don't want to be insulting to some of the heavier bands out there, but it's more approachable than, just trying to think. Name a really heavy black metal band that's hard to get into.
Burzum.
Okay. For whatever reason, this beer's talking and my brain's not. But like, I would put them online with like kind of an Amon Amarth in the, oh yeah, no, you can listen to this and kind of know what they're trying to say, while at the same time not just bleeding from your ears.
Yeah, I mean, and it's really tough to do that, to make something like black metal or just any kind of like extremely heavy music in general be approachable. Because I think that someone who might be into thrash might even be able to get into this. I don't see people who are into like the softer kind of things, like alternative rock and stuff like that, being able to get into it. But definitely the softer side of metal would be able to jump, feet first, or jump head first into Wormwitch.
I have a pretty good description of that, actually. The friend of mine who I go to most of my shows with, he is a really big Slayer fan, and he swears by a lot of thrash metal, and that tends to be his genre. He listens to a whole lot of thrash metal, and he got really heavily into Wormwitch after this, and he doesn't tend to get into the heavier stuff. Like, I went to a Cradle of Filth concert with him, and he liked the show, but wouldn't really listen to Cradle of Filth. I went to a Suffocation show with him, and again, like we talked about it afterwards, he's like, yeah, no, that was an amazing live set, but I'd never listened to that. And I think, and this is one of those bands that we do still talk about, and the topic of it comes up every now and again, and it's like, yeah, no, like we're still listening to Wormwitch, and I remember a little while ago, another thing that they have going for them is remember how you said that all you need is a dumb title and you're sold?
Yeah.
I'm just going to read this. And smote his ruin upon the mountainside.
That sounds incredibly lewd.
I don't know what that means, but I like it. Just putting it out there.
That just sounds incredibly lewd.
I mean, Mantle of Ignorance is also a pretty good name. Howling from the Grave.
Relentless Death, as if death wasn't relentless already.
Yes. The Mantle of Ignorance. Sounds like politics.
Wereglid. What is that?
So while we're talking about things that have amazing titles, we have a film that we watched that we should probably talk about.
Yeah. So Hawkeye.
So Hawkeye, aka Karate Cops, a movie that would probably be sued by Marvel right now, or Disney rather, if it came out in the current year. This movie came out in 1988, and first off, I just want to do a real quick shout out to the people that, or the person specifically that introduced me to this movie, because I'm a big fan, and George Weidman, aka Super Bunny Hop on YouTube, has a podcast called Dad and Sons. It's a fantastic podcast. I think I've mentioned them before on here. I listen to them way too much. You need to go out and listen to that show, because a couple episodes before the time of recording this, they right after Resident Evil 2 remake came out. They were talking about Resident Evil 2, and well, George couldn't because he hadn't played it or hadn't finished it yet. And the reason was he was at his girlfriend's house. And one of the things he did while at his girlfriend's house was he watched this movie and talked a little bit about it. And I knew after about 30 seconds of listening to him talk about it that I wanted to watch it. And then they mentioned the whole thing was on YouTube. And I was like, okay. So there will be a link in the show notes, as well as the previous bands that we've talked about, to the YouTube video where you can just go watch this whole movie. So I want to know what you thought of this movie.
I think of this movie in the same way that I think of The Room. It has all the makings of a cult classic. It just needs to be put out there.
So I think we need to mention something real quick. This movie was filmed kind of at the height of Bruce Lee and Bruce Lee movies and karate movies and cop movies and buddy cop movies and that whole subgenre. And this is a movie that was written, directed, and starring George Chung. Now, let's ask a real quick question. Who is George Chung? He's a member of the Black Belt Hall of Fame and a 5-time world karate champion. Okay? He's also a co-founder of Jugo TV, which is a martial arts thing. And he made this movie himself, starring himself.
Starring, written, and directed, I believe.
By himself. Playing the character Alexander Hawkeye Hakamoto. Now it's a slightly racist buddy cop movie.
Yeah. There's quite a bit of racism in it.
Slightly racist, yes. So I need to kind of maybe put a warning at the beginning of this. But it's perfect as a timepiece that was made in the 80s, going in with that knowledge, made by a very American black belt champion, kind of both making fun of Japan and at the same time respecting the hell out of Japan. Like, you know exactly what you're getting into 7 minutes in, when there's this glorious scene when, he's late for work and he's a cop, right? He's late for work and they don't know where he is. And the reason he's late for work is because he's getting his black belt test. And the sensei walks up to him and says, "Oh, this is the highest honor." And his response is, "Oh, well, to me, it's just a way to hold up my pants." It's so, there's so many amazingly dumb lines in this movie.
It's like I said, I look at it the same way I do as The Room. Me and damn, my voice. Me and the lady kind of. I will preface that we had a bottle of wine to ourselves. We finished the bottle about halfway through the movie.
It's the best way to watch this movie, I'm not gonna lie.
Yes. But we spent the latter half of the movie just texting each other memes, or not memes, but basically using the gun and the cowboy emoji because Mr. Hakamoto is from Texas. So I was like, cowboy emoji, revolver.
Well, they call him Cowboy Cop multiple times in the film.
Yeah.
Especially Sakura, the evil gang leader, who
the main antagonist.
One of the two main antagonists refers to him as Cowboy Cop. But I would like to mention that at the very beginning of this movie, there's this bank robbery scene, and the bank robbers hold up the bank, And Hakamoto is called to the scene with his backup police officers. And there's this. They love saying the line, "Don't piss me off."
Don't piss me off.
Don't piss me off. And
now, why'd you have to go and do that?
Now, why'd you have to go and make me mad? But it's this husband and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend duo of bank robbers, or maybe they're just friends. I don't know. But I think she says my husband at one point.
I was not paying attention.
They line up to rob the bank, and the cops show up, and so they take all the bank tellers and they run them outside, and they say, "This is stick up. We want to leave in our helicopter." And the police officer says, "We don't have a helicopter." And then Hawkeye says, "We don't have a helicopter." And then they're like, "Well, we want safe passage." And he says, "Well, we can't do that." And then they say, "Well," and then he's just like, "Be careful. Don't piss me off." And then he acts like he knows the lady bank robber. Like, they act like they've dealt with each other before, and like we're supposed to know history between these two characters. But instead of getting history between these two characters, or some sort of like background story, or maybe like, maybe this is the main antagonist. Actually, no. Hawkeye just says, "Don't piss me off," and then they shoot one of the hostages in the back. And he turns around and says, "Why did you have to go do a thing like that? Now you've gone and
made me mad.
Pissed me off. Now you've gone and made me mad." And him and the cops, he just does this weird karate jump move thingy, and they shoot everybody, including the hostages.
No. You left out the best part. He walks up to one of the bad guys who's holding a hostage, and then just straight up punches the hostage in the face. And then the hostage's head down the step
bounces off of the bank robber, and they fall on the ground.
And then he runs back down the steps, and the cops just start opening fire. And Hawkeye does this little weird move where he ends up on it. He does like a he does like a little flip, and he ends up on his stomach and just starts shooting. And it's like, why?
What did I just watch? Everything about this movie is just why. Like,
it makes no sense.
I actually don't want to spoil the whole plot, because it's to do with money and gangs and silliness. It does make some sense, and like the movie does have a through line and an ending and a setup for a sequel, which never got made. And
unfortunately,
yeah, I agree. And I think that there's just a lot of amazing examples of, movies don't get made like this anymore. The film industry is too big now for this to happen now, because the entire film is filmed with a handheld camera. There is no like steady shots in this movie. It's from end to end handheld camera, to the point where one of the ending scenes, when they're in like a not quite a subway, but like I think it's like a train station or something, and the camera's straight up like jolting side to the side. You can see as the cameraman is walking towards the action that's going on the screen, and the audio is so bad you can hear like echoing inside of the station, and you can barely hear what the characters are saying because they're so far away from the fucking microphones. It's terrible, but good.
I want a reboot.
And then all of the scenes in the so-called hideout of one of the gangs is actually just like a low budget motel. I'm pretty sure they just rented like a low budget hotel and just ran around in the hallways for a bit. Maybe even just like a floor or a couple of rooms. I kind of want you to talk about the scene when they're getting followed.
Oh my god, that is great. So they're out for a jog. Just a regular morning jog out in Vegas through a neighborhood. And I guess one of them notices they're being followed by somebody, and they believe it to be one of the antagonists, like goons. And so they're just running. They act like everything's normal. Then all of a sudden they dip behind a wall, and this guy follows them and tries to go around the corner to continue following them. And Hawkeye and his partner jump out and just start beating the shit out of him. And the guy's just like, stop, I'm a reporter. And everything's good all of a sudden. Like, Hakamoto gives him his hat and stuff. And
the line is great because Hakamoto says to the reporter, wait, are girls going to see this newspaper? He goes,
oh, that's right.
He's like, wait, are girls going to see this photo? Because he asks to take a photo of them. And he goes,
yeah, and he's like, that's right.
Are girls going to see this photo? And then he goes, yeah. Like, just kind of bewildered and confused. And he goes, oh, okay, to take the photo. Like, also, there's this pretty great scene where he gets dumped by his girlfriend. Like, his partner, who he doesn't want to be partnered with, goes home to his wife, and then he goes home to his girlfriend, who dumps him immediately when he gets there because he hasn't been there in a week. He goes home and he sits on his bed, takes his phone, and calls like 8 different women. Like, just back to back. Hey, I know I haven't returned. Yeah, and then eventually his partner, they go out and go do cop stuff things, I guess. But he just like calls first girl. Hello? Yeah, no, it's Hakamoto. Yeah, Hawkeye. Yeah, no, I know I never returned your call, but like, could you call me back? Okay, talk to you at some point soon. Bye. Calls another girl. Hello, hi, yeah, it's Hawkeye. Like, I don't know how this
one, but the fact that he walked into a gay bar. I won't repeat the lines because they're good and you need to watch the movie, but
I'll leave it at, hey, honey, do you want to pack some
shit?
Yeah,
because he says, man, I just want to pack shit with the boys.
He's like, so where are you from, honey? And he goes, like, there's this obviously extremely flamboyant gay man, and he's just like, hey, so where are you from, honey? And he goes, oh, I'm from Texas. And they go, oh, what do you do in Texas? He goes, I just, hanging around, drinking beers, packing shit with the boys.
Yep. And then he goes to his hotel room and just starts calling like 8 different women.
Watch the whole thing. It's an hour and a half long. You won't regret it. Smoke a blunt or drink a beer before you watch it, and you will laugh hysterically. It's, I think, a underappreciated piece of art from the 80s that is terrible in every way, and thus becomes something it was not intended to be. It was intended to be a serious action film, or a like pseudo serious B-movie action film, and instead came out as a hilarious fucking comedy. With a banger soundtrack, I should mention. The soundtrack, who I don't know the name of the composer on hand, I can get it in a second, is actually kind of fantastic.
I think we should move on to the next small part.
Most important movie announcement.
Tommy Wiseau and his new movie, Big Shark.
I think I can safely say that we will be speaking about this movie when it comes out.
Yes, we will. As soon as we can both get our grubby little hands on it, we will be talking about it.
I'll have you know I have perfectly normal-sized hands, but yes, I very much would like to.
All right, stop compensating. But I'm excited for this because I am a Tommy Wiseau fanboy. I have loved everything that he's done. From The Room, which, like Hawkeye, terrible but amazing movie. The Tommy Wiseau, which is a show he did in 2011 for one season, where he was kidnapped by aliens and forced to play video games.
Here's the thing with Tommy Wiseau. Initially, he just wanted to make a movie, right? I think now I think he's in on it. I think he gets it. I think he's kind of accepted his brand as the guy that makes bad movies.
Oh no, definitely. He's embraced it. I mean, in The Disaster Artist, we don't know how much of it is like true to the T, but like he was devastated when people were laughing at the room in the theater it premiered in. But his buddy, who I can't remember the name of, but was one of the actors in the movie, comes up and he's like, hey, just because they're laughing doesn't mean they're not enjoying the movie. They're genuinely like laughing. And it's just like, I know it's not the result you wanted, but you're making people laugh. You're entertaining people. So he's 100% in on the joke ever since. Otherwise, I don't think he would have made something like the Tommy Wise Show.
My favorite line from the trailer, which is, "Oh look, water."
Oh look, water.
Just watch it. It's like a minute. Just watch it. It looks terrible.
It looks terrible, but it looked so good.
Yeah. I hope that's on Netflix at some point. But thank you very much for listening to this episode of Audio Tapes and Visual Drugs. I intentionally did not finish all of my beer because this thing is making me drunk way faster than I thought it would.
Hell yeah, brother.
Yep. I got like half of it left. I will finish the other half of it.
Amen. I'll drink to that.
Fair enough. If you would like to support the show or get early episodes, you can find it on patreon.com/BLINDIRL. That's me, Blind IRL. And if you want to support Rhinestone, you can find him over at twitch.tv/Rhinestone or on Twitter at DubsCheck'em. Anything else you want to shout out?
Just remember that is RYNE.
STONE.
Yes. We can spell stone, we promise.
Please take the time to check out the artists and films that we have spoken about today. And thank you very much for listening to this episode of Audio Tapes and Visual Drugs. I don't know how you found it, but you're awesome. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye.